that, but yes.
I wanted to confirm. And
yes.
One moment that was really powerful for me, I mean, like the whole, outside of the whole thing, I mean, is seeing like a liberal icon, like, you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg writing the opinion that reaffirms this doctrine. And I'm wondering if you can speak to how, you know, it's outside of this liberal conservative dynamic that we live in the United States, and it's kind of left and right, how things are framed and how both are equally part of that same oppressive system.
Yeah, that's very important. A lot of people are shocked to see her name associated with the Doctrine of Discovery, but it's part of the premise of foundation of the system. I mean, it's integral to it. And so they don't really have another starting point or another frame of reference than that. And what gets hidden or unnoticed by using the phrase, the doctrine of discovery, is the fact that discovery is the word that's being used to talk about that ancient effort on the part of the Christian nations of Europe to locate places on the planet that were not under the domination of any Christian dominators. And there's a specific sentence from the Papal Bull of May 3rd, 1493 in Latin, which says, "Que sub actuali dominio temporali alicorum dominorum Christianorum constitute non essent." And the word dominio in that wording means domination, and dominorum Christianorum means Christian dominators. So it's the effort to locate or discover those places on the planet that are not under the domination of any Christian dominators. And that's what's being used by the United States, by Canada, by other states of the Western Hemisphere, by Australia, New Zealand, you name it, really any state government, because the word state in that context is referring to a system of domination as well. And so people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and other actors within the overall system, whether it's the political aspect of the system or the legal or what have you, they always are going to go back to that original claim of a right of domination based on those Vatican documents and other such documents. So it's very important to understand that, but it's challenging because there is so much information to deal with. And then I wanted to also mention the Line 3 pipeline, Standing Rock, the Line 3 pipeline in Minnesota, all these different efforts to send pipelines and oil and so forth through traditional territories of Native nations and peoples is all connected to this exact same claim of a right of domination. So they can go ahead and, in their view, put oil pipelines through the sacred areas or the rice fields of the Anishinaabe people and others. And even though the oil is likely to leak and does leak into the ground from those pipelines, no matter how much they claim otherwise, and poison the drinking water or the wild rice of the Anishinaabe people as an example, they feel that they have the right to go ahead and do that because of that premise, that initial premise that they have the right of domination over all of those areas.
Any other questions
or comments?
Yeah, comments on that even.
Yeah, just on that point, I'm curious if, as you guys carry forward this work, if you get a lot of pushback from the church or others when you make these connections to how this dominance and dehumanization plays out today.
I'm actually grateful that we receive a lot of support. There is, of course, probably pushback out there. I think it's also the approach in how we frame the messaging. And I think that's a really important part of having these deeper conversations and inviting this exploration and examination of the darker side of history. My dad as well, for those of you that may not know, or I don't know if you know as well, Britannia, but I mean, just this journey over my entire life and beyond. I find it very amazing to see that my dad originally started, it says in the movie, to call upon the Vatican in the 90s to revoke the papal bull. Is it a 14? I always forget which one, Dad.
May 4th, 1493.
The 1493. And I mean, there's so many papal bulls that were basically issuing over and over again. But in 2016, he had the opportunity to meet with Pope Francis and deliver his book and information. And recently, we've been fortunate to be having conversations with Vatican Cardinal recently. So there's been ongoing efforts that my dad has had. And I find that there's probably pushback on that level because it's really like going to the heart of so much. But it's the time of reckoning, as many people know and are saying, that we're looking at the deeper side of history, darker side of history, so that healing can begin, so that awareness can begin, because it's time. Like, our planet needs this, people need this. It's the future vision of things to be able to understand how things got this way, to have a way forward. And I think that's really the gift of being able to explore deeper into the background. So I'm not saying that all people are just like, yay, we want to do this. It takes courage and personal accountability and responsibility. But I think it's really great to have had so much support. In fact, people also wanting to kind of do their own thing, though. That's the only thing that we feel kind of frustration around, is people sometimes just like interview my dad and go run off with their own version of how they want to present things. So I'd like it if people like acknowledge my dad's work and all that he's put into it. But I don't know. Do you have anything else you'd like to add to that, Dad?
Well, I think that when we look at the overall patterns of the effort to destroy original nations and peoples, and I say original because I want to make people aware of the contrast between those nations and peoples that were existing in a particular place, such as what is now called North America, as contrasted with those folks that came by ship across the ocean much later in time, thousands of years later, and then began to set up their own claims of a right of domination on top of the original nations and peoples. But when we look at the pattern of the churches and the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, the corporations, there's an amazing book called Thy Will Be Done. And it's just extraordinary in revealing the pattern of domination all through the Amazon and the effort to wipe out the original peoples there and other places throughout Central and South America, where as long as there are original nations that have ties to a specific area of land, it makes it much more difficult for corporate interests and so forth, the exploitation of the forests and those types of things to go forward. So if they are able to simply get the original peoples, indigenous peoples out of the way by killing them off or displacing them, then they have access to all the resources, as they would term it. And so the billions and trillions of dollars that come from the exploitation of the earth, that's all at stake. And so this is a very massive picture. But the thing is that when people can go deeper into these strands of meaning and realize that this all originates with these very ancient documents from the 15th century, and we could even go further back to the justifications that were used using the Old Testament story of the chosen people in the promised land and that sort of reasoning. But those patterns of domination in the Vatican papal bulls were picked up by the US government and by the US Supreme Court. So for example, Joseph Story, who was on the Supreme Court in 1823 at the time of the Johnson versus McIntosh ruling, he was still on the Supreme Court in 1833 when he published a book called Commentaries on the Constitution of the United States. And in that book, he examines the British claim of title to lands in North America. And he looks at the Vatican papal bull from May 4th, 1493, and quotes Latin language from that document, Ac barbari nationis deprimantur. which means and barbarous nations be reduced. And he took that wording from that papal bull and connected that to 22 words in the Johnson versus McIntosh ruling. And those words read that discovery gave title to the government by whose subjects or by whose authority it was made against all other European governments. So he drew a direct connection between the Vatican Papal Bull of May 4th, 1493, and the Johnson versus McIntosh ruling of 1833, which he had a hand in helping to decide. And so that's evidence, proof right there of that connection stated by a member of the US Supreme Court. So that's a central part of the foundation of the entire federal Indian law system. But notice that the title of the book is Commentaries on the Constitution of the United States. So that plays some role in the way that the US Constitution is used in the whole framework of the United States as the American empire is used against our nations and peoples and has been for more than 2 centuries now.
And Dad, could you reference what was the book that was from the Library of Congress? Was it?
Well, yeah, it's mentioned. Well, there are
the one that
can you share?
Yeah, can you share the opening of that? And I wish you had it with you. Sometimes you just have it right there, but
Yeah. Well, it's entitled "The Privileges of Columbus," and it was published by the Library of Congress in 2014, I believe it is. And it has something called the Washington Codex. I'm not sure why they call it that, but it's the part of the writings of Columbus. I think they call it his Book of Prophecies or something along those lines. In any case, in that book, reproduced by the Library of Congress, are loose leaf pages, and that's a reproduction of the papal document from September 26th of 1493. And in the opening, when you flip open the cover of the book, there's a little tab on the corner that allows those pages to be tucked in there. And then people can pull those pages out and examine them. And as I was looking at the document, of course, it's written in a kind of a weird combination of Latin and Spanish, but I noticed that about 8 lines down in the document were those exact words that I already quoted, the que sub actuale, dominio temporale, and so forth, and that's in the September 26th document. So this is a little bit technical here, but they took that wording from the middle of the May 3rd papal bull of that year and put it 8 lines down at the opening of the September 26th document. In other words, they're saying out of the entire document from May 3rd, 1493, the most important thing to focus on is the fact that they issued this mandate to go forth and to discover those lands that were not under the domination of any Christian dominator. Now, if you look at, I have a book here called, this is the one called European Treaties Bearing on the History of the United States and its Dependencies to 1648, which is the year of the Treaty of Westphalia. But in this document, it has the same wording, eight lines down. But the thing is that this is the English translation, and it says, all islands and mainlands whatsoever discovered and to be discovered toward the west and south that were not under the actual temporal dominion of any Christian lords. So anyone reading this English version of the Latin wording would have no idea of Christian dominators being the translation of Dominorum Christianorum. And if you take these words, the Latin words rather, Dominorum Christianorum, and type those into Google Translate, into the Latin translation into English, what comes up is Christian lords, not Christian dominators. So the way in which I've been able to investigate a lot of this is kind of funny unusual circumstances where I happened to meet a Vatican ambassador, for example, at the United Nations, where I asked him about that phrase, Dominorum Christianorum, and he kind of beat around the bush and was vague. But that same evening, across the street from the United Nations, we were having a panel discussion on the doctrine, and a professor from Wesleyan University showed up who happens to be from Africa originally, and he teaches Latin. That's his profession. And I said, oh my gosh, I said, you teach Latin? I said, that's amazing. What does Dominorum Christianorum mean? And without pausing for one moment, he said, Christian dominators. So that filled in that gap. So we know then we read this Christian lords and realize that the more accurate translation, which is not framed in kind of softened language or made to appear more benign, the true harsh reality is that Dominorum Christianorum means Christian dominators, and dominio means domination. So there's a lot of detail that I usually don't go into, but I think it's crucially important for people to understand that the way in which these words are framed or how they're translated and so forth is very critically important to how we understand the present day reality. And when we look at how much dysfunction there is in the world, how much breakdown, how much abuse, how much violence and so forth, you know, where you have the main countries on the Security Council of the UN, supposedly for world peace, yet they're the largest arms merchants in the world. When you look at the way armaments are produced and sold all over the planet and so forth. So there are these weird contradictions that we really need to come to terms with if we're going to create a better planet and a better way of life for not just humans, but for all beings on Earth.
I want to invite some more questions from you in the time we have left, but I also want to just say, remarking on what you are just sharing, Dad, that the importance of really reflecting on and examining the narrative that's been put in place, and really a kind of like a mythology, like, okay, this is the pretty package that we want everybody to believe in. And that's what's been put through the history books and what people learn in school, because people often come to this film showing, when we've shown it for many audiences, and they're saying, well, I'm a highly educated person and I have this many degrees and I'm a PhD and I went to all these different, universities, and I've never heard of this history. And well, how come I didn't know this? And so they're just appalled and they can't believe that they're so educated and they don't know. Well, it's also interesting, like, what is the narrative and how can people can't really get this information just anywhere because it's not readily available. This is based on my dad's scholarship of all these years and really diving deep into, like, nobody would spend the time and energy and effort besides my dad, just to say, to really be obsessive like that and like go over these documents and translate from Latin to English and do all this research. And there's been a lot of incredible synchronicities too, like I feel like spirit leading the way so that, the right books or the right people come into the picture to really help the journey. So any other questions?
Well, thank you for that amazing service to humanity. And, you were, Steven, you were talking about like reckoning with these systems and reckoning with coming to terms with what it means. How, like, individually can we best reckon with that outside of, education is great and there's more education to have, but what tangible things would you recommend for folks to support the work you're doing and help, have the reckoning move along?
Well, I think that the showing of the movie is really a terrific way to bring people up to speed, because within the space of an hour and 1 minute, people can go from no understanding to quite a substantial understanding of at least the gist of the situation, and have a starting point for the rest of the work that they might do. A lot of times people don't realize that this work is about how reality, human reality, gets created and maintained over time, and on what basis it gets created. So when you look at the patterns of racism, the patterns of what's being commonly termed now as white supremacy, the murdered and missing Indigenous women, and all over the world, which has been going on for more than 5 centuries as a phenomenon. It's not a recent thing. You look at all these various patterns of destruction and devastation. Why is human reality organized in this manner? It doesn't have to be. There are other alternatives, but I think that there are influential powers that don't want us to really believe that there is any other way. So that's why there was an attack on our nations and peoples to separate our children, to tear our children away from their families, their loved ones, and force them into institutions of indoctrination and brainwashing. And those were called residential, quote unquote, schools, or boarding, quote unquote, schools. And my grandfather and great grandfather, ended up at Haskell boarding school as an example. And so the whole idea was that they would not be allowed to learn their language, their traditional language, during their most formative years, when that would be easiest for them to learn. And I have examples where I was told that elders that as children were found to or heard to speak their own language had their tongues put on dry ice and the top layer of skin peeled off their tongue, or they were made to kneel on broken tile. All different kinds of abuse and trauma that happened to children in those institutions that then had a ripple effect as they grew up into adulthood and did not have the understanding of proper parenting skills or love and affection and so forth. And all of those dysfunctions continue over generations. And how do those kinds of things get corrected? And I want to mention that in terms of the residential schools up in Canada and the human remains of children that have now been found, more than 1,000 human remains of children found up there. And then at Sherman Indian School over here in Riverside, California, not that far from where I am here in Long Beach, the cemetery of the Sherman Indian School has 70 unmarked graves. And I say unmarked because there's no headstone with any individual name of any child on there. And yet the fence around it and the signage says Sherman Indian School Cemetery. But what cemetery have you ever been to where all the graves are unmarked? It's very bizarre. And that's another form of dehumanization. I just watched a movie the other day about a Soviet man who ended up spying or releasing secrets to the West during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he was found out to be passing information to the West, and he was tried for treason and executed. And they buried him in an unmarked grave. So that's the lowest form of, or the most extreme way to disacknowledge someone's existence is to put them in an unmarked grave. It's a real point of shame and rejection. The greatest form of rejection, I guess, is the way to put that. So here are these 70 children that don't have any headstone with their name on there. It's the exact same kind of thing, right? So yeah, I just wanted to mention that because I think these are such extreme patterns. And then going back to this idea of the 7 laws that Birgil mentions in the movie, or traditional teachings and understandings that go back to our creation stories, our origin stories, that have built within them and built within the coding of our traditional languages, patterns of thought and behavior that are supposed to be designed around the idea of respect and reverence for all life, and to sustain that, maintain that for all future generations, forever, really. Whereas in the papal bulls, it uses the word perpetua to talk about domination forever, perpetually, eternally, domination eternally. What a horrific idea that you're going to organize life on the planet on that basis. So, and then make money off of it, because they have the sentence in the May 4th papal bull that says in English, it translates in English as, "We trust in him," capital H on him. So that's indicating the deity of the Catholic Church, from whom empires and dominations and all good things proceed. So they're envisioning empires and dominations coming out of their deity and moving around the planet. It's just quite bizarre when you think about it, all the implications of that.
Did you have a question, Iana, or anybody else? Hi, Beth.
Hi. I was gonna say that,
Pull back from your camera, from your microphone there a bit.
what?
It's just loud.
Oh, because you guys are not loud, so I want it to be loud enough.
You can hear you loud and clear.
I can't hear you guys hardly with my computer like up to my ear. But anyway, what I wanted to say is in Oregon, they're trying to build a big, huge pipeline going over 400 waterways that a bunch of people are fighting against in Oregon. And that's, I forgot what the thing's called, but it's for natural gas, and it's to hook up to a pipeline that's already working, like, I can't remember even the border state that it's coming from, the other pipeline that they want to connect to and go all throughout Oregon and come out at Coos Bay and build a big, huge thing that will take like ships like every single day across the world, to not even for consumption in the United States, it's to go overseas. And that's a big thing that the state of Oregon is like on the verge of approving or not approving, and they've been fighting against that for many years. So it's stuff like that. And then the Line 3 that you were talking about, people are fighting against that. And I think that it's, numbers of people is what is needed to like combat some of these things, because they don't care. They'll just do whatever unless there's numbers, huge outcries. That's all.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's very helpful. And those are the types of projects that are all over the planet, going on all over the planet, right? And so then that gets to the level of consumption, necessary consumption of the world's quote unquote resources in order to sustain the global system as it currently is organized. And then you end up with the question of finite resources and how to deal with the bottleneck of all that. But there's got to be some way of reorganizing the planet in a different manner. But what does that look like? So those are the challenges we face. And I appreciate that, Bev. Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Well, I would love to revisit what Shawna was talking about in the beginning on offering some really awesome guidance on how to take this in. And I think, unfortunately, the stream started in the middle of what you were saying, Shawna, and then the recording hadn't started yet. So if you're willing, would you be willing to talk about that again?
I remind me exactly, I guess just being able to really sit with the film. Is that what you mean? Like,
yeah.
With
the film and all the shame and grief.
Yeah, I think, well, I just was wanting to really speak to the visceral response, like it's almost like a bodily response, like it could manifest in whatever unique way that it is for each person that watches the film. It could also, as we mentioned, it's very beneficial, we find, for people to watch the film again and again. I've watched the film, I don't know how many times, and it touches me in a different way each time. That's the beauty and the power of the film. And I don't know how it does that, it just does. So I feel like there's just a lot of layers to it, maybe because it's like helping us to peel back the layers that have just accumulated of this trauma that all of us really feel in our bodies and our systems, in our hearts and spirits in various ways. But I just want to say that however people experience the film and watching it either the first time or the 30th time, as some of the people that we know have watched it, like just honoring what's there and what you're experiencing and allowing that to really just be with you, because it's a part of the processing and the healing needed right now. And allowing for these kinds of deeper conversations and opening to new awarenesses, as I mentioned kind of later, just the history that hasn't really been shown before, the hidden history that's also part of the Great Reckoning and the healing and the way of moving forward, I think is really important in these times. So I just say thank you for those that watched it and for your courage to watch it again or invite others, because it is a really important way to really honor ourselves and honor the ancestors. And I say, you know, this is ancestry, all of the ancestors, no matter what continent, even our European ancestors, you know, over there, they also experienced the trauma, the domination, dehumanization patterns over there long before. And then all that manifested with the domination code building, and then bringing that, you know, with the domination, dehumanization across the planet, that it spread. It's almost like a virus. The original virus is what I've been saying, you know, is this domination code and how it's been manifesting and playing out. So just knowing that that's kind of the basis of our shared trauma, but in different forms, I think can bring us together. It doesn't mean that we're saying like, oh, well, you don't know my pain, so you don't get me. Like, people might be like that. People are really triggered right now. And I just think it's important for us to sit with what's true for us, but honor, like, people are all coming to terms with their own experiences right now. And I think it's hard. It's a hard time, but it's also a really beautiful time to be able to just really process and so we can move forward and heal in a good way. But I am going to offer a workshop at 3:00 for those that want to join me in that, and I'll talk more about these things. So, and I do speak about the reverence code as part of the way forward, and I have a course that I take people through. So those are some offerings that I share with people.
You know, going back to something that Brooks, is it Brooks McLean? Yeah. My eyeballs. Anyway, that you asked about what can people do. And our website is originalfreenations.com. Well, the one is ShawnaBluestar.com. Is it ShawnaBluestar.com? Shawnee?
I put it in the chat box as well.
Okay. But originalfreenations.com is where people can order the movie, or 38plus2productions.com is another way to order it. But I think the more that people can understand the information in the movie, and of course my book, Pagans in the Promised Land, is another part of the overall puzzle. And there's a wonderful book that I've read for many years called A Poetic for Sociology. The title is irrelevant, but written by Richard Harvey Brown. And he makes a comment in the book where he says the thing itself, whatever that thing might be, becomes emergent in the process of being named. What that means is, until something is named, it does not come into your mind or into awareness. You have to have a name for something before you can become aware of it. And that's why the use of the term domination is very intentional, because until we understand what that actually means, and it's complex, it's not a simple thing. Sounds very simple, but it's very, very multifaceted. But once we have that name, now we've got a phenomenon that we're able to identify. So if we take that as a category, or maybe domination and dehumanization as a category, and list all of the examples that we could think of or that we could identify that fall under that category, that would be extraordinary, because it would talk about the prison industrial complex and the millions of people that are incarcerated or that are caught up in the probation system or the parole system, or the way in which the quote unquote legal system has been weaponized against people of color and or others, or poor people, and using that as a means of revenue generation for the empire, or the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan and all these adventures across the planet to extract resources from other parts of the planet for the military industrial surveillance state complex. All of these things and more, much, much more, are aspects and evidences of the domination system. So then the question becomes, once you chronicle that and do a detailed survey of that, how and by what means are we able to organize life in a different manner? And when we look at the perilous state of the planet in terms of the coral reefs and the acidification of the oceans and the the radiation from Fukushima and radiation at Hanford Nuclear Facility or all across the sands of the Southwest, and you could just keep going on and on. Flint, Michigan, all the lead in the system there that poisoned children and babies with callous disregard by the government officials there, as if these people are not even human beings that deserve any kind of respect and compassion. That's the kind of behavior we have to get to the root of and figure out how you're going to change the system so that it's premised upon a fundamental respect and compassion and all the things that Birgil Kills Straight is talking about with the 7 laws, or the Anishinaabe people, they have their version of the 7 laws. We have these traditional understandings and ways of life that were existing here in this continent, in this hemisphere, for thousands and thousands of years before the domination system was brought here. Or you could go to Australia and New Zealand, and the Aboriginal people there have been existing there for 50, 60,000 years. And so they had their own ways of life. So there are these important knowledge and wisdom systems that the invading, colonizing systems did their level best to destroy, without knowing that those were the very systems of knowledge and wisdom that they would need in the future. Because once the planet came to the point where it is now, you're going to look for a lifeline, but how are you going to use the domination system as your lifeline? That's the basis for all the destruction. So we have to figure out a different worldview and a different kind, all the models that are necessary to build that beneficial way of life for everyone and everything. Anything else, Shawna? Yeah.
Any other questions? We're going to be wrapping up our time here. It looks like I do want to share, we have ongoing events. My dad said, or Brooks, you had asked about how people can support us. If you have groups or organizations or communities that you'd like to have us do a similar event where we show the film and offer a Q&A, we're happy to arrange that based on our schedule. And you can connect with us on our websites or social media like Facebook or Instagram. We're also going to be doing a summit with the Shift Network coming up. So you can catch us there and many other incredible elders as part of the Shamanic Wisdom Summit. So I'll share that in the chat box. But it's just been really good to connect with all of you. It's always, the time goes by fast. And I just want to offer, if there's any other questions or anything, we're happy to answer. Yes, Ayana. Is that how you say it?
Iana.
Iana, okay.
I have kind of a 2-part question, so just feel free to, if anything calls you. I think about, the depth of what we're talking about in terms of, the oppression and domination paradigms. And if we were to kind of go into a dream state in terms of, if we could wave our magic wand and kind of shift things logistically to kind of infuse this system or the government or whatever levels of the oppressive systems with the more natural way of living and the more, indigenous concepts. Like you think about when Puerto Rico was brought into, not even brought into the Union, right? But the Taino wisdom wasn't infused in the government, or the, Hawaiians, the native indigenous Hawaiian, that's not infused in the government. All of these, obviously Iroquois nations, all these things, we say we're a democracy, right? So I'm wondering if you could speak on your dream image of what our systems would look like in terms of that. Would it be the council of, elder women, also with the council of youth, and that kind of collaboration? And maybe what would you see in terms of those structures? And then my second piece, so again, anything that calls you, would be for applying this knowledge to FAIR, and knowing that we are on this incredible land, and that we're in many ways, and many Indigenous people don't come and attend because it's kind of this sacrilegious feeling, weird word, I realize, with what we're talking about, but this anti-sacred feeling of being on this land that's been gathered on for 10,000 years, and kind of having this festival that is in some ways embodying that principle and in many ways not. So how would you kind of apply these teachings to the festival itself, and our need for reparations and atonement for the tribes that we are, dancing upon their graves in essence? So those are my two thoughts, if you wouldn't mind.
And I think we have 1 minute to address that. Those are very profound questions, and I thank you for those questions. I don't want this to sound like a cop-out, because I don't intend for it to be, but I do believe that we're going to 15 after the hour, and we're about 1 minute away from that. I think that those are the profound.
Extra time if you guys want to stay late.
Okay.
Of course, you're not required.
Okay, fine. Then I think these are the profound kinds of questions that need to be explored and need to be dialogued about. I think that those are the very kinds of questions that we have to ask in order to begin to work toward answers and solutions. One of the things that I love is the documentary series Native America that was showed on PBS. It's a 4-part series, I believe, but the very first one is quite profound in terms of showing the amazing systems that were here, the ecological systems that were nurtured and maintained over thousands of years by each of the original nations that had sacred responsibility for maintaining those places. You look at all of the massive amounts of foods and so forth that were here existing. And that's because of an intentional way of life, an intentional way of interacting with life itself, the life energy, the life principle, Leha which is the energy life force spoken about in our Lenape language. And if you work with that life force, then you will get the benefit of working beneficially with the life force. So abundance leads to abundance, not in terms of, oh, let me be standing on this Himalayan amount of cash so I can piss down on the poor, pardon my language, but so that we can have a beneficial way of life where everyone benefits and all life forms benefit. If you have that as your starting point and your intention, that's totally different than an intention where let me grab as much as I possibly can, as quickly as I can, to get on top of the heap where I can dominate others, or that type of patterning. And then the beneficial relations between men and women, between the sacred feminine, the sacred masculine. How do you organize life on those bases? And those were the types of things that had been worked out. For example, in the Lakota language, the sound la means a term of deep affection. So Lakota, just even embedded in the name for the people, which is talking about allies, and the Wo Lakota, which is a sacred way of life based upon the 7 laws, Woope. And when you put all those things together, those were all systems worked out over countless generations where the people intelligently, with intentionality, worked toward creating the most beneficial way of life for the people. We can do that. That can all be done, but it has to be done in a very careful manner using English, because English is a peculiar language. More than 60% of it is based upon the language of the Roman Empire, Latin, which is a language system of domination. So it tends to be creating divisiveness and people being at odds with each other, and they're almost more comfortable in that kind of space than in a beneficial, harmonious space. And then with regard to the country fair and the land of the Kalapuya people, I think that it's not just the country fair, it's the entire Willamette Valley in terms of the traditional territory of not just the Kalapuya nation, but every nation, original nation, and wherever people are living. And there's this tendency now to talk about land acknowledgement. That's a nice thing, but it's really the acknowledgement of the original people and the original nation of a place, not just the land. And I think that, so let's have original nations acknowledgement. What is the name of the original nation where you happen to be located anywhere on this continent or anywhere in the hemisphere, and have that acknowledgement that those people, each and every original nation and people, were cut off from their traditional way of life and that original way of understanding in a genocidal effort to destroy in whole or in part their very existence. And lastly, I'll leave you with a quote by Thomas Jefferson. Gosh, we could get into some real craziness, like the American Conservative magazine, a guy named Declan O'Leary just wrote a column, an article in which it's the meaning of the native graves, the meaning of the native graves. It's good, actually, or they're good, actually. I think is the subtitle. They're good, actually. So he's talking about these native graves of children being good, and saying that all the destruction and devastation that the people went through is it's worth it. And he put italics on worth it because they were exposed to Christianity or received Christianity, or the descendants of the pagans and descendants, that's us, received Christianity. So therefore it was all worth it. That came out 3 days ago on July 8th. And so this mentality, this warped mentality of domination and supposed evangelization is still persisting. So how do we deal with those kind of people and those attitudes and the kinds of behavior that go with that? These are the challenges that we will continue to face, because dealing with people's attitudes, values, and beliefs are the most difficult thing to change. And they're very certain. They have a lot of certitude in terms of God's will and God's word and that sort of thing. And as a Methodist minister once told me, beware of the man who believes that God is on his side. So thank you. I'll leave it there. I hope that was responsive to your question.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead, Bev.
In regards to the country fair, and I'm a 40+ year vendor, so I, grew up there pretty much. Yeah, way longer than double my life. But anyway, in regards to like cultural appropriation and like the totem pole, not only that, but like people, I make moccasins, so people, that aren't native that make moccasins using a sewing machine and charge $600 something for their moccasins. And, we're native people. I make only handmade moccasins, and I feel like $100 is overkill, and I just have a problem like charging that much, but I do. Anyway, not 600, but and then also the beadwork, that people, take, and then the native people that are there, particularly like Louise was there forever, and she, sold her stuff for like $20, whereas a non-native person would go and sell the same thing for $150. So it's just, I think that there's really no clue when it comes to, anything that has to do with, that issue, really, because like the totem pole, there are some huge meetings that I attended, and there are some really, really hot feelings going around those meetings, and it is actually kind of became unsafe for the native people there to like even try to bring it up. And there was a couple of meetings at the Longhouse, and then there was a board meeting at the board thing that one of the people in regards to the totem pole followed one of our native girls out to her car and approached her when she had nobody else around, like getting all hot with her. So I just think it's hard. Country fair's hard, but I still have fun.
Thanks for that, Bev. I think those are part of the challenges that we have, how to maintain respectful communications when we start to get flared up or triggered. I mean, those are the real challenges too, right? And without strong, positive communication, even when we have points of disagreement, that it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to move forward. So, that's the basis for everything, is whether we have some kind of a point of communication or don't. And I think that's where Shawna's work is so extraordinary, because she really assists people to go through types of transitions and diving deep into a lot of the shadow areas of ourselves that need to be dealt with for healing. So, yeah, thank you for that. And I think we'll just leave it there. We've gone a bit over our allocated time. So I really appreciate your time. And like I said, Original Free Nations, my wife Paige wanted me to mention that this has always been spirit-led work that we're involved with, and we have experienced that very deeply in our lives, and we're very blessed and fortunate that that is the case. So we appreciate being able to reach your audience and have you distribute this information. And thanks very much to the Country Fair organizers for this opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you, Wanishi.
Thank you so much. Incredible hours there. So now I'm next. Shawna's going to be back to do a workshop, so we get to experience some of that work. I'm really excited for that. We have a break here for a minute before that happens. So stretch your legs, run to the restroom, get a snack, and get ready to come back and settle in. Anything to add, Britannia, right now?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, just really looking forward to integrate this powerful experience with your workshop, Shawna.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.
See you soon.